How you going, ladies and gentlemen? I've got my work rags on and we're going to do another job on the 450 SLC here, and we're going to change the upper control arm on the left hand front side of the car. So here we go. Well, okay, I've got the car jacked up and I've got it on a stand each side at the front. The reason for that is so I can turn the wheels in either direction, just so I can get to the bolts behind the wheel hub. According to the book, they say disconnect the brake line up here and remove the caliper. What I'm going to do is just unbolt the caliper and hang it up, because this is stripped out up here, and trying to get this off I'll twist the brake line. And also, if I did that and just left these hang, the extra weight on the disc. The other thing it says to do is unbolt the steering knuckle here. I think we can get to it without having to worry about all that, and I'll just undo the steering lock and pull the wheel around. Okay, I've just spun the hub around, and that's the top bolt of the upper steering arm for the ball joint. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take off the brake calipers and remove this bit of plate here so we can get the nut there. Now, I have done completely opposite to the book. I unbolted the steering arm and took off that middle bracket there, and unbolted the calipers, and I'm going to tie it up on the torsion bar here. And the reason for that was now I've got plenty of room to get at that bolt at the top knuckle here. Now, the reason I'm changing the whole control arm, or actually the reason I'm doing this job, is because I think the upper ball joint here is worn out. These control arms, the ball joint is riveted on. So you can buy the ball joint, drill out the rivets, and they provide little nuts and bolts and put them in. But there's not much difference in the price for just buying the whole complete upper control arm with the ball joint, and it also comes with the new rubbers up the top. So at this stage now we're at here, which it didn't take long or anything. The most important thing we've got to do now is put a jack under the lower control arm, because you have the force of the spring pushing down on that control arm. If you take off this nut at the top, the whole lot's going to drop to the point where the shock will hold it. So most important, now we get the little trolley jack and put it under the lower control arm and take the weight off it. But before we do that, I'll have a smoke. Yes, one thing I learnt at my age is when you're working on cars, just take it easy. There's no rush, there's no hurry, and one thing's for sure, you want to make sure you do the job properly. Okay, the socket for undoing the brake calipers is the same as for undoing the steering arm down here, 19 mils. Now we've got the jack in position under the lower control arm, taking the weight off it. So my next chore is to undo the ball joint nut here. Right, I've taken the nut off the ball joint there. All these bolts are 90mm sockets, but I'll show you the bastard of it all now. And this is the bastard of it all. You've got to undo the nuts up here from the top of the control arm, and I've got the nut off this side here, but the problem is you can't get a socket in there. The frame's in the way under the car. Can't get the socket on this one here. Frame's in the way down there. Can't get it in there where the spring goes through is in the way. And I'll show you up the top of the engine. I took the charcoal filter out and tried to go down, drop a socket down there on a long extension, because where that light is shining down there is where the control arm bushes are at the top, and the one at the rear is impossible from the top of the car. Anyway, I'll undo them with spanners and carry on. I decided to have a break from that for a minute and separate the ball joint from the axle carrier, so I'll just do that now with my ball joint cracker here. Actually the ball joint came out very easy. I could have just pulled it out, and as you can see I'm doing the right thing. It's absolutely buggered. So now I've just got to undo the bolts at the back up here. Well, I've already undone one. I'll carry on and undo this side and pop the bolts out. Okay, with some difficulty and an extension, you can get the socket in here. And see, I've got a spanner over here on that side, so I'll hold it with the socket and I can undo it with the spanner. And that works out well later if I can get it in there and put the correct tension on the bolts when I put the new one in. Well, once you get the bolts out, there and there, the arm comes out easy. So well, let's go study it. Like I was saying, the ball joint is completely gone, and I was looking down these and you can see the wear and everything. The rubber's hard as a rock, so I did the right thing. And here's the new one. And one thing about it, I've suffered metal fatigue with cars before. I had it with a 300 6.3 SEL, and twice I've ripped the lower control arm on it from metal fatigue. So it's nice to know have something new in the car that's solid. And I wanted to change the bolts. I thought, I'm going to do all this trouble, I'm not going to put the old bolts back on. And I had to buy new control arm bushes to get the bolts. And I thought, oh well, the bushes might get used 1 year if I live long enough. And I thought they came individually. They come as a set, of course, and I ordered two, so I've got two sets of these bloody things. So if anything happens on the other side of the car, at least I can use them for that. So what I'm going to do now is have another cigarette and then put this on the car. Well, I've just spent the last half hour putting these bolts in. It's a bit of a bastard, especially on this end, because you just can't get around here, and you've got to feed the bolts in and then try and get them started. This one over here, I'll put a nut on this one already. It's very important, actually it's pretty critical. You put the bolts back the same way as they were. The bolts themselves go from the inside out that way and the nut's on, and the same thing, the bolt goes out that way with the nut on it. Okay, I'm just going to have another smoke. It's turned into a 4-smoke job, but everything to do with cars is not necessarily easy, is it? So I'll just put the nuts on there. I'll put the ball joint back on the wheel axle here, and get me torsion wrench and tighten them to their settings. Right, we set the torque wrench to 60 Newton meters for the upper arm, upper control arm bolts at the top. Right, the steering knuckle arm bolts 80 Newton meters. Spin it around, the one there and the one down there. The steering arm bolts here are also 80 Newton meters, and they have a tag there to kick down. It's just to lock the bolts in place. Okay, the brake caliper bolts located here are 115 Newton meters torque. Okay, everything's back together again. Just make sure that your wires for your brake pad sensors aren't out and touching anything. Disc is not touching anything, spins freely, and the wiring up here is not going to touch the wheels or anything like that. And there's the new control arm on the car. I'll just lower the jack under here now. That was a crucial thing. If you ever work on the top control arm, you've got to support the spring from under the bottom control arm. So what I'll do, I'll take the jack out, put the wheel back on, and take the car for a test drive. We'll chat again sometime soon. See you on.